Good morning, everyone. I'm so glad you're here. My name is Chris Rebelo. I am the Senior Director of Communications here at the Buck Institute. It is my extreme pleasure to personally wish each of you a very happy new year. And I am excited to welcome you to, this is the 10th event of our Live Better Longer seminar series. We have a special treat for you today. Our President and CEO, Eric Verdin, is here to talk about the science of longevity, fact versus fiction. A couple of quick housekeeping notes. If you haven't already put your phones on silent, please do so. And I always like to give a nod to the fire marshal when I point out the emergency exits at the back of the room. So, how many of you are new to the Buck? All right, welcome. We love newcomers. Rather than me going on about how great our scientist is, we're gonna play a video that you'll hear directly from the people who are doing the important work. Joran?
The Buck Institute is interested in understanding aging, not only to make us live longer, but to actually alleviate and suppress the development of diseases.
Chronic disease is the great health challenge of our time. Aging is the main driver of chronic disease. To eliminate chronic disease, we must harness the biology of aging so we can live healthy longer. The Buck Institute is the world's first research organization dedicated solely to the biology of aging. We work with the building blocks of biology to understand how we age.
The Buck is concentrating on really trying to go to the root of the problem, so understanding that we can sort of intervene really early.
The Buck Institute is probably the best place in the world to be working on aging because there's so many different aspects of aging that are being studied. It's key because no one lab can do it all.
Our scientific explorers are brilliant, curious, and committed.
The idea that you could actually develop drugs that slow down the aging process was really something that 20 or 30 years ago, people thought this cannot be done. Not only can it be done, but we will do it.
The pieces are in place. And we are in a unique position to put them together. Our world is defined by paradigm shifts, created by scientific discoveries. The biology of aging is the next frontier.
We're working toward a world where healthcare is better. It's a world where if we can eradicate the aging component to disease, we're all going to live healthier and longer.
It's just an incredible vision that really will, surpass anything else that we've ever seen before.
We are inviting you to a future of aging without illness. It's happening today, and it's happening here. Join us.
Before I introduce Eric, I want to thank our sponsors. They are listed in today's program. I also want to make sure all of you have note cards to submit questions. Eric loves questions, so have at it. If you need more cards during the course of the event, raise your hand. A volunteer will come and get you a card, and they'll also be collecting the cards during the event. Special welcome to those of you who are joining us on Zoom. You too can participate. Just enter your question in the Q&A section of Zoom and somebody will get that question up to me. So, it is now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Eric Verdin. You can read about his educational background in our program. He's a native of Belgium. He's held several faculty positions around the world. One of them was at the National Institutes of Health, where he worked with Dr. Tony Fauci. Eric has published more than 270 scientific articles, and he holds 18 patents. So this guy has frequent flyer miles galore. He presents at aging symposiums around the world. If there's anything interesting happening, he knows about it. Eric, come up, let's get started. One final note, while Eric is a doctor, he's not your doctor, and he's not licensed to practice medicine. So anything that we discuss today, if you want to make changes in your lifestyle, please talk to your doctor first and carry on. Also, if any of you have issues hearing today, we really want folks to be able to hear what's happening. Raise your hand and we'll try to get the volume boosted for you. Okay, I think that does it. So, Eric, I want to start off by welcoming you. And let's talk about some of the exciting stuff that's happening at the Buck. I think this ARPA project is probably it. What's it involve?
First, can you hear me? My mic is on. Let me welcome you all.
So, Joran, can you up the sound a little bit?
Is it better now? Yes, okay. First, let me welcome you all, those of you who are coming from the first time and our long-term supporters. When I joined the Buck, which is about 8 years ago, one of the things that I was at UCSF and Gladstone in San Francisco beforehand, one of the things that drew me was always the vision that the Buck is the gem of Marin, and taking on this position has been an incredible honor and a joy to actually really bring the Institute to its full potential. And we're still far from the full potential, but we start seeing the realization of the Buck emerging as the leader in the world in terms of aging research. And we are the only research institute in Marin, Sonoma, and Napa. And I think this is something to, in my opinion, to be celebrated. I'm a native, I live in Mill Valley, so I'm quite familiar with the area and its beauty. And now we have in our midst an institute that actually proposes to really change the way we think about aging. So and our community, all of you together here are really key in helping us feel supported in what we're doing. So thank you for being here. And for those of you who help us financially, thank you as well. But spread the word, do everything you can to let people know about our mission and what we are trying to do. So let's dive into the science. Yes, we just were awarded an absolutely amazing award in size. As you can see, it's up to $52 million grant. It's the largest grant we've ever gotten. It's from a program called ARPA-H. Some of you might be familiar with DARPA, which was a research arm of the Defense Department. This ARPA-H was created by Biden. This was part of initially the Moonshot project for curing cancer, but it evolved into something much bigger, which is the idea of really preventing disease before they occur. And in this respect, this has been the mission of the Buck for as long as I can think. The idea that we, instead of waiting for diseases to occur and treating them, we actually are taking a proactive way, which is the realization that aging is a lifelong process, and if you slow it down, you can actually prevent the diseases from occurring, not forever, but for as long as possible. And this is really the whole idea of the Buck Institute, is focusing on health span. Now, NIH is getting it. We understand also from the incoming administration that this whole idea is going to be a priority, so we are somewhat worried, but also cautiously optimistic that the coming years will see more resources, more interest in the whole concept of preventing disease. So ARPA-H is a program. We received one of the first very large awards, $52 million over 4 years, as I mentioned. I want to acknowledge actually who is the leader of this program is none other than Lee Hood, our latest faculty member recruit, who's here in the audience. Lee is a pioneer in the field of genomics medicine, but also in the concept of phenomics, which will be the basis of this whole project. And a little bit of a announcement also, Lee will be holding one of these meetings, and I really encourage you to come and listen to him. He's a giant in medicine, and having him in our midst leads to this type of awards, but also really will allow us to realize the vision that we have to change medicine the way it is practiced. So a few words about PATH, which is this program. We think it will revolutionize how human studies and phenomics are done. So phenomics, let me just sort of backstep for 1 second in terms of what is phenomics. So if you go to the doctor, which I hope you do on an annual basis for your checkup, you probably get blood drawn and you get your results, your cholesterol, your blood glucose. There's about 100 values there that most doctors work with. So this is essentially how modern medicine assesses your state of health from a biological point of view. There's also the clinical, looking in your eyes, at your tongue, and so on. So what phenomics is a quantum leap in terms of our ability to measure variables in your blood. So I mentioned your typical physician deals with about 100 values, and most of you, I suspect, know your cholesterol level, your vitamin D level, your calcium maybe, and so on. What Lee's group and his team have developed is a series of tools that we call omics, and this is technical, but just hear me out. Transcriptomics, proteomics, this is measuring all of the proteins in your blood. Metabolomics, measuring all of the metabolites, like glucose is one of them, cholesterol is another one. Transcriptomics is measuring all of your RNA, your messenger RNA, which encodes for the proteins. Using wearables, which are emerging as major tool for health. Believe it or not, the Fitbit now has morphed into Whoop, the Oura Ring. All of these tools are going to be instrumental in measuring and assessing your health in real time, but also your laboratory finding, everything else. We can now, with this technology, gather more than 100,000 data points per sample. Okay, just imagine the leap from 100 to 100,000. That's a 1,000-fold increase in complexity. Now, I would be lying to you that we know how to use this information. We don't. We don't. And one of the major problems is that your typical physician will follow your blood sugar and say, well, it's going up or down, that's fine, that's one variable. And our minds are okay dealing with 100 variables. When you're dealing with 100,000, there are no human minds that can actually deal with this complexity. So a big part of Lee's effort, Phenome Health, which has become our partner, is really the idea of using artificial intelligence to parse through these enormous amount of data and look for patterns. And this is what AI does well. It can take enormous amounts of data and it would look for things that correlate, for patterns that emerge. So this is the essence of what really is happening at the Buck. And we're going to be applying these tools to everything. Now imagine this is a bit of like looking for a needle in a haystack. We're going to have so much data. We are learning how to interpret it. The idea is that in the future, this will lead to the identification of a whole series of novel markers. Okay, so your doctor will not just rely on your blood sugar and your cholesterol level. He or she will have reams of data to interpret. And so the essence of the effort right now is to define that landscape. What does it look like? And I'm delighted to say that it's not only Lee, but also Nathan Price, whom we've recently recruited, is participating in these studies, but many other faculty as well. So this is only step one. We think there are going to be many, many more. Now, what it means is that we've entered a stage of medicine called big data, and which is a drastic departure from what we've had in the past, where doctors are limited in terms of their ability to assess how well you are doing. Along with this is a whole idea of these biomarkers of aging that you probably have heard, the epigenetic clocks and all of this. These are tools that are going to be used to essentially define where you are in your trajectory. We all go through lives. Think about how traditional medicine goes. Today, you go see your doctor tells you everything is fine, come back next year, until you reach 65 and God forbid you have a heart attack. And quite often these things just happen out of nowhere. You sort of knew that you were not eating the best way or exercising the most, but you go from being healthy to being someone who has a disease that could actually kill you at the first instance. A large fraction of the inaugural symptoms of a heart attack is death. So can we do better? And this is the whole thinking of this medicine, is that can we actually measure at every one of you throughout life markers that will allow us to say you are on your way from getting a heart attack. And this, if you don't change anything to your lifestyle or if you don't intervene medically, this is going to happen 15 to 20 years from now. And this is the evidence we already have. We see markers of these chronic diseases happening 15 to 20 years before. Case in point is, again, Alzheimer's disease, which has become a scourge of our generation, is being treated right now with little success. And one of the major reasons is at the point at which you are being diagnosed with this condition, it's not completely too late, but it's very late in the process. The disease has been ongoing for a long time. So there's another study here at the back that will look at these really early markers, 15 years early. And I predict that many of the interventions that have failed to date might actually very well work when we initiate them much earlier. So, as I mentioned, this is only one first study. There are going to be many more, and we're in the process actually of applying, probably by the end of the month, to a whole group of other initiatives from ARPA-H. Now, ARPA-H is a very different mechanism from NIH. The checks are much bigger, which is already one good thing for us. But also, it's a much more targeted form of research. Quite often when we get a grant from the NIH, it is essentially, it's a contract. They give you the money, they expect you to do interesting work, and you have a lot of latitude in terms of what you're doing and where you're going. ARPA-H is much more targeted, so they really come with a set of milestones and they want you to deliver. So I expect that within 4 years we will have made leaps in terms of our ability to deploy this type of technology. Do you want to show the next slide?
Yeah, so I do. So this is one of the most interesting aspects, I think, of this ARPA-H project. It's called the time trial.
So just to mention, so give you a little bit of the scientific background. A lot of this technology is new. So we are essentially learning how to walk, and we do not really know what we are to expect. One of the big variables in all of us is, and you might not know this, is that you are not the same person in the morning as you are in the evening. Your biology changes completely. For example, when you are at night, you're fasting versus feeding during the day. Many of the things that we talked about vary during the day. Your cortisol level is high in the morning, it decreases during the day. These are so-called circadian rhythm. This is the way our body sort of reacts and adapts to a night and day cycle. Actually, our circadian rhythm is driven by the sun and to some degree by the moon. There are some the female cycle is driven by a 28-day cycle, which is aligned with the moon. So we have evolved over millions of years in an environment where the environment changes and our body responds profoundly. You might not know this also, is that you are not the same person now you were 10 minutes ago when you walked into this room, because hopefully I've brightened your minds and I've made you excited about what's happening. All of these variables that we think, well, did just happen, they influence us profoundly. Just imagine the feeling that you have watching a horror movie or watching a love story. All of these things have a biochemical impact on us. So the time trial is trying to address this in a very simple way, which is to ask a very simple question. Of all these hundreds of thousands of variables, which one vary during the day? never been answered in humans. So it's a really fundamental study. Now, the reason why this is important is obviously we want to understand circadian biology. One thing about circadian biology is that it has a profound impact on your health. Shift workers, for example, those people who are constantly forced to adapt their cycle as a function of when they work. If you're working at night, you're not going to eat when you're sleeping during the day. So the cycles are completely dysregulated. That puts you at increased risk for all of the chronic disease of aging, clearly. My constant travel, as Chris mentioned, is a real challenge for me, traveling across time zones. So there are many people who are confronted with these things, and we're learning still how to best deal with them. So what time will do essentially looking. It means temporal investigation of multimodal element. Multimodal elements are all these variables, and temporal investigation means we're going to look over time. And you can see on these very complicated slides what we're going to be doing is essentially in the green panel there on the upper right is frequent sampling at different times of the day, and trying to define what are the things that change, and are they relevant? Now, this has obvious implications. When you go to your doctor, sometimes you get your blood drawn in the morning, sometimes you get it done in the afternoon. This has a profound effect that is frankly not addressed by medicine. So we're going to codify all of this, and hopefully being able to predict what your blood sugar should be in the morning if it's so much in the afternoon.
So I want to point out that we are going to be recruiting 125 individuals for this. Recruitment is currently scheduled to start in April, and that those of you who might be involved in it will be among the most deeply characterized humans to date. So
yes, and by the way, some of you might have heard about Brian Johnson, who is an influencer who is studying himself intently. He calls himself the most measured man in the history of biology. You're going to be outdoing him by a factor 10. So goodbye, Brian Johnson.
So, questions are coming in, but I want to talk about your lab. So your lab here at the Buck Eric focuses on aging in the immune system. Basically, and in simple terms, describe one of the projects in your lab.
Yes, so there are a lot of things that go wrong in aging. And one important aspect because I remember the title of the day is sort of separate facts from fiction. I will start by saying something that might appear negative, but it's the truth, is that to date, there are no supplements, there are no drugs that delay aging in humans. So if you get an Instagram feed calling for this magical pill that, for $70 a day will actually promise eternal life, run. Because those things do not exist, but they will in the future. And the only way they will is by careful, rigorous studies that are based on science, which is the foundation upon which we are built. So one of the things that goes down during the aging process is NAD. And it's shown up on the upper left there. NAD, think about it as a molecule that exchanges energy in your cells. The way I make it, the analogy I use quite often is the bricks truck, or the truck that carry funds between banks and stores. At the end of the day, those trucks, the armored trucks, come to every major store, they get up the cash and they bring it to a bank. So they are actually able to transfer energy, money being the energy of the economy. The role of NAD is the same thing. It carries energy between different parts of the cell and really is critical in maintaining everything you do, your memory, your ability to repair DNA. All of this is dependent on energy. This is why we eat. We constantly need a form of energy to come and allow us to conduct repair, which is the basis of not aging. And moving, thinking, doing all of these things. So NAD is critical. We know that NAD levels decrease during aging. It's been shown by our group and by many animal species, including humans. So the question is, and we know that there's an energy deficit as you age. You are less able, You just probably know this if you've reached a certain age. You walk slower, you think slower, everything just slows down. And a lot of this is due to your inability to actually transfer energy via NAD. So we've been studying very hard. So there are a whole bunch of supplements, by the way, that exist today on the market that you can actually purchase. Some of you might have heard about NMN or NR. These are precursors to NAD. And the idea is that they are replenishing the NAD levels. And I should say that they do so partially. So I don't want to bring them down completely. However, what no one had done is really understand what is the reason why NAD levels are decreasing. And we've identified in my lab, along with other colleagues, a molecule called CD38, which increases during aging for reasons that are not entirely clear. That's a whole other problem. But CD38 is what we call an NAD hydrolase. It loves eating NAD. And when it becomes too abundant, it just brings down the NAD. So our approach now to combat the decrease in NAD level is to actually not to pour more NAD into the system. So imagine you have a tub with water, that being NAD. The traditional approach to try to raise the NAD level is to pour more in. But what we've found is that there's actually a leak in the sink. That's CD38. So what we're looking for is to plug that leak, CD38. And so we have both programs going on in the lab that are studying the biology of CD38, understanding how it works. But we've created a startup, which is something that we've been doing actively here at the Buck, is really taking our discoveries and bringing them to companies. And this startup called Napa Therapeutics is actually focused on identifying small molecules that block CD38. And we have these molecules. The company has been in business for 4 years. We have, and these molecules remarkably increase lifespan. The CD38 inhibitors increase lifespan, which is really interesting. That tells you we've hit on something that is really critical. And we will start clinical trials by the end of the year. So I'm greatly optimistic about the idea that we will bring yet another tool to try to fight the disease of aging with this type of work.
Great. So we're getting a ton of questions. I'm going to zip through some of this. And we're going to talk about what's hot in research on aging. Everybody's talking about Ozempic. So what do you think, Eric?
Yeah, I think this is really exciting. Someone has asked me, how long is it going to take to get a drug in the market that really targets the aging process? And I think we might already have them. We just don't know about it. They need to be studied from that standpoint. And Ozempic, the Mounjaro, all the so-called GLP-1 agonists, semaglutide, Zepbound, Wegovy, these are all the same. Ozempic and Wegovy are actually the same drug, one targeting diabetes, the other one targeting obesity. Zepbound and Mounjaro is the same drug, one targeting obesity, the one targeting diabetes. As you've heard, these drugs are taking the market by storm. For very important reasons. One is they are remarkable treatment for obesity, like we've never had before. And they also are incredible treatment for type 2 diabetes. Now, the reason I got excited about those is when we study aging and we try to understand what are the pathways that really drive aging across all tissues, insulin signaling and your ability to metabolize sugars is central. It's central in many respects. One, in animal models, these are the pathways that we identified that regulate aging in the most powerful way. There's a program called ITP, Intervention Testing Program, NIH-run program, which scientists can nominate molecules that they think will interfere with the aging process, and then they will test them at multiple sites. They've gone through 70 drugs so far, and 5 of them are targeting insulin signaling and glucose metabolism. So that really, again, tells you completely independent from the animal studies. This is, again, evidence that targeting those pathways are important. People always ask me, why what should I do in terms of my diet? And I've said this to this group before. I don't think there's a miracle diet, veganism, vegetarianism, paleo, keto. None of these diets, I think, intrinsically are better than the others. Some are worse, something that I call SAD, the standard American diet. that is, we know that is worse. That's the worst. If you're eating a lot of processed food, if you're drinking a lot of fruit juice, if you whatever else you're doing. So there's a lot of effort trying to understand what is it about the best diets that we can reduce to something really a common thread that you could apply to your life. And my advice to everyone is always go back to the fundamentals, which is sugar, and how you eat sugar, how much sugar you eat, and how you metabolize it, and how you deal with all of this. And we could have, actually, by the way, a whole session on this, because I think it's one that is really, if you want to impact your life, your diet is going to have an enormous impact. Now, so this whole picture I'm painting is that glucose metabolism, insulin secretion, is all, diabetes is like the extreme of this, and obesity, which is quite often linked with diabetes, is the extreme part of poor glucose metabolism. But even if you're not diabetic today, the evidence points to the fact that mitigating and having optimal glucose metabolism, sugar metabolism, is really key. And in this respect, we are seeing an emerging picture, which is many of the drugs that we use in the clinic to target diabetes, and I'll speak about metformin. Some of you you probably have heard about the discussion about metformin in the aging space. But now another class of drug called SGLT2 inhibitors, Jardiance, is an example of this. All of these drugs point to additional effect beyond taking care of diabetes, which is that they seem to be targeting other organs, the brain. Many of these drugs seem to have an impact on brain function, on preventing Alzheimer's. They lower blood pressure. They reduce your risk of heart disease. They may improve fatty liver disease. They may reduce the risk of kidney disease, and may help. I mean, these new drugs actually have the added interest that they may help you in cutting down on your alcohol consumption. So the picture that is emerging is that these drugs might have global anti-aging effect. Now, does it mean that you should all go and ask your doctor to be on it? Probably not. But I can promise you that there are studies that are ongoing that will come to the future that will really examine the potential effect. Now, a lot of people will react to this as saying, I'm healthy, I don't need to go on a medicine. My answer to this is that we are all faulty evolution products. So we have evolved in a world millions of years ago, and we haven't changed that much genetically, so we're still carrying that evolutionary burden in a world where we were either confronted with food abundance or no food. That's how the history of humanity was probably 100,000 years ago. So there was all of a sudden a lot of food in the spring, people ate, we are engineered to be hungry, and we are engineered by evolution to put on fat. So this is really who we are. And there are some of us who are very lucky, who can eat anything they want, but for most people, if you don't pay attention, you're going to put on weight. This is, I think about us as sort of faulty in a way. That this is if you are living 100,000 years ago, this helped you to survive, because when the food was abundant, you put on a lot of weight, and while the food became scarce, you were able to live on that extra fat and to survive a winter, for example. Now, we live in a world that has completely changed and is completely inappropriate for this type of genetic makeup, which is food is abundant all the time. So all of us have to watch what we eat. So that means that even if your blood sugar is normal, most likely it is higher than it should be. And so the idea of using these interventions in some ways to address some of the problems. So I'm totally at peace with the idea that many of us in the future might actually rely on a medicine to help us optimize our metabolism in the face of a world that is not obviously, there are many things that you should be doing before you're taking on a medicine, and it's one of my pet peeves is to be approached, by someone who doesn't exercise, doesn't sleep well, eats anything, and says, you have a pill to help. This is not the way. There's a foundation of healthy living that we're working on, trying to understand what is really healthy living. But adding these drugs in the future, maybe to some of us who are more prone to, or who are even more prone to obesity and so on, is going to become critical. And I think we definitely are at peace with the idea that there might be a day where a significant fraction of the population is taking a medicine to help.
So, time for your questions. I did not make a slide for this. When Eric and I were prepping, I said, I bet we're going to get a question. Do you think we should avoid alcoholic beverages? Today's downer.
Now, I have to be careful with this. I don't know how many of you own who are vendors. I made that mistake, by the way, talking to a group of donors, and it turned out like 3 of them were, had vineyards, and they really did not like what I was saying. So here's what I said, and I think it really, I want you to really hear me. First, there is no safe amount of alcohol. That's clear. It's a toxin, especially for the brain. It's not healthy. It's never healthy, despite what you might have read in the literature. There's a whole series of studies claiming that people who drink 1 or 2 glasses of wine per day are living healthier and longer. Many of these studies are supported by the wine industry. Now, so if this doesn't remind you of what happened with the tobacco industry about 30 or 40 years ago, protection against Parkinson and so on. So they're the same discourse. So I believe that alcohol is a toxin. Just remember this. So that being said, it's also one of the great pleasures of life. And I love a good glass of wine, and so like many of us do, I like beer, I like tequila, I like all forms of alcohol. So there's no problem with this. The question is, how can you reconcile the fact that our culture relies so much on alcohol and the fact that we know it's not good for you? So for me, I have not stopped drinking, and I don't tell anybody that I've stopped drinking, although this is dry January, and I'm not drinking this month. The way I reconcile this in my own head is that we also know that alcohol is what I call a social lubricant. It is an incredible tool or adjuvant for people to get together and have fun and be silly, and it loosens the relationship. It can make a great evening. So my advice is that, and this is something that I follow myself, is I don't drink on a daily basis. And frankly, I sleep better and I feel better. So I think if you're drinking every day, I encourage you to test it. The second thing is, there is nothing in the literature that should prevent you from drinking occasionally. And the data says that having 1 or 2 glasses of wine on a Saturday with friends for a special dinner, opening a special bottle, there is nothing wrong with this, and your health would not suffer. Where it becomes dangerous is if you have 4. 4, we're getting into the real toxic area. So, someone that I like a lot, when asked, what would you recommend? There was a centenarian, what do you recommend about longevity? And so there was everything in moderation, including moderation. And so to me, that's my approach to alcohol. Don't stop drinking completely. First, I tried. It's incredibly hard socially. You will threaten, a lot of people want to hang out with you. They will argue that you've become boring. Now, what I have seen is actually, and it took about 1.5 years for me to go, I go to a lot of business dinners, a lot of parties. This week is JP Morgan week in the city, so every night there's a dinner. I used to go to these things and I would feel totally excluded because I was not drinking. But there is there's a trend. Less and less, especially the young people are drinking much less, by 20%. And there's many ways to have fun without being drunk, I can promise you. So it takes a sort of a reframing of how we think about what fun is. But we've had dinners at my house with friends with no alcohol. We'll have kombucha, we'll have something else. The important is to find an alternative There's a growing industry of non-alcoholic beer, mocktails, and so on, which actually still allow you to recreate the sense of specialness and something that you don't drink every day. So if you've never tried, give it a try. I think for me, it's been I would not say life-altering, but it's definitely something that I have seen make a difference.
Great.
Well, that was a long answer for a very short question.
Does moderate exercise, such as walking 3 or 4 times a week, make a difference as far as aging? So talk about what's the minimum somebody should aim for?
That's one of my favorite questions. Actually, I did not plant it. So someone asked. So let's backtrack for 1 second in terms of what is healthy living. First, by optimizing your living today, you can expect to live 15 to 20 years longer in good health. So that's remarkable. So for most of us, average life expectancy in the US, 75, 95 should be your goal for everyone. That's what the data says. Some of you might have a genetic background that's going to be a little more lucky. You might go to 98. Some of you might go to 90. But and there are some communities, even with Marin and Ross, life expectancy today is 88. And I can guarantee you that not everybody in Ross is actually optimized. So 88 to 95, that's additional delta, having everybody adopt what we know is the optimal lifestyle. So what is an optimal lifestyle? It is physical activity ranks at the top. Actually, I'll start with the most important for me, sleep. We are chronically deprived of sleep as a population. If you cannot watch a movie at 8 o'clock at night in the dark without falling asleep, you are probably chronically sleep deprived. So that's your easy test. Just put on a movie 8 o'clock after dinner and you watch a movie. If you're asleep after 10 minutes, you are severely sleep deprived. It takes half an hour, you're probably chronically deprived. So that's the test. Optimizing your sleep is number one because it allows your brain, once well rested, to make all of the other decisions in the best way possible, which is to eat correctly, to exercise, to do all of this. So think about your sleep as the foundation. Number two, nutrition, and we've talked about glucose a little bit. Number three, physical activity, which is the most powerful anti-aging medicine that we have today, and probably for the next 10 to 15 years. Now, when I say this, half of the audience's face goes blank, saying, I don't like to exercise, I don't like to sweat, I've never been to a gym, I don't have the energy, I am limited in my mobility. So many excuses. So here's the take-home message. Walking 30 minutes a day, so that's 15 minutes in the morning, 15 minutes after dinner at night, will decrease your year-over-year risk of heart disease, heart attack, stroke, cancer, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's by 40%. Almost bring it down by half. Now, we live in a culture where, and sadly this is very true in Marin, where we take our cars to do everything. It's even more true in some other areas of the country. So it really requires a framework. If you don't have the time to walk, although I would argue everybody has the time to walk 15 minutes in the morning and 15 minutes at night. And it doesn't need to be brisk walking. It needs to be walking solidly. Get a dog. I think that will get you to go out. He or she will remind you every morning. So these are, and 80% of our fellow citizens do not meet that threshold. 80%. So just imagine the impact of such a small society change will have in terms of our burden on our healthcare system and all this. If you're not doing it, I would love for you to try it for 1 month and just bring it. You get up in the morning, you put your sneakers by the side of your bed. The first thing you do when you get up in the morning, put them on. Don't ask anything. Groggy, half sleepy, just go walk out for 15 minutes. You will see the benefit within a month. So that to me is the number one hack in terms of living healthy. And without it, the risk, if someone I won't ask the question because I was going to ask who's meeting that threshold today. Right now,
Who's what? Good.
Okay, good. I would say
we're in Marin County.
Probably Marin County is an exception. By the way, our life expectancy is one of the longest in the state and is one of the longest in the country. Way long, which is a reflection of what we're seeing. For those of you who did not raise your hand, don't feel ashamed. It is never too late to start. That's the other beauty about aging. We have examples of people having never exercised, starting at age 70 and reaping many of the same benefits. So it's never too late to start. And if you cannot walk, join your local pool and there's exercise in the pool where people can help you walking. Get a bicycle, a stationary bicycle. There are many, so this 30 minutes does not have to be walking. Walking is obviously the most portable thing. You can do anywhere you want, but it can be a bicycle, it can be a rowing machine, it can be anything you want.
So a sign of the times, I've gotten a few questions, and you and I have not discussed this. People want to know about cannabis and what the approach is. I know more and more older adults are using it. What's your take? Where is the research going? What can you say about cannabis?
Well, there are two aspects to this. One is medicinal cannabis, which is an active area of investigation where people are discovering it has powerful medicinal aspects. If you have some cancer and you have chemotherapy and you have horrible nausea, there's evidence that it will work. There's evidence it will work for some people afflicted with chronic pain. So there's a whole space of where medicinal cannabis is true, and it is supposed to, and it is working. Still, a lot of work needs to be done. Now, recreational cannabis is a whole other story, and I would give you the same advice as I would give you for alcohol. I don't mind smoking cannabis, and I've enjoyed it like many of us have, but and I do it occasionally, but it's in small doses and it's not every day. So that's the same thing. If you have friends who like it and you want to do it, totally fine, but not to the point of being on the floor, half unconscious. This is really not the point. So I believe, again, it is a replacement for alcohol. Is it more or less toxic than alcohol? I think the debate is still open. As you know, it's been legalized, so it's becoming much more available. People are trying it. It's becoming more socially acceptable. So I think I'm totally open to the idea, but again, there are clear effects on the central nervous system, which might not be good. We know that chronic users of cannabis show accelerated aging of their brain. And if you're smoking it, I think you're back into 30 years ago with all the risk of cancer and inhalation of smoke. Now, there's a whole other also part of the whole cannabis debate, which is CBD, which is the non-psychoactive form of cannabis, which you can buy as gummies in many places, actually including your pharmacy, which helps some people with anxiety and sleep. Again, small amounts, totally open to this. I don't, we drink caffeine, which is a psychoactive drug, and it's clearly been shown to have some positive effect on longevity, by the way. This is one drug that clearly has effect on longevity. CBD, we're right at the beginning. I worry when people tell me, well, I take 4 gummies every night because I can't sleep otherwise. There might be some other underlying process. So I'm open to all of these, I think, but I'm also worried that we're going to be replacing alcohol by something else that's going to create a whole other set of problems. Now, this is very different in teenagers. I think there's a lot more concerns in terms of the chronic use of cannabis in teenagers, as you might be aware, for 2 reasons why they use it much more indiscriminately. They tend to overdose on it, and their brain is developing. And I think the idea of putting cannabis on a developing brain is definitely not optimal. So I hope this is...
You mentioned coffee. So what's the good stuff about coffee?
Coffee is, first, coffee is wonderful. And that's what's keeping my brain going here. You don't want to see me uncaffeinated. So coffee is, again, something that's been with us for thousands of years. I think we have the benefit now of beautiful coffee, from many different sources. I think things that are important is, for me, is not so much the coffee, is what you put in it. If you're loading it with sugar and cream, it's probably not that healthy. If you're drinking it black, the way I do, you're probably going to get all of the benefits and none of the secondary effect. There's some studies that are so clearly from association studies, and I should say these are not causation studies. So the way epidemiology works is we would follow this room and would ask you to conduct a survey and ask who's drinking coffee, how much, and then we would follow you for 50 years and say who lives longer. It turns out coffee drinkers who drink 2 to 3 cups a day live longer by 2 to 3 years than non-coffee drinkers. Now, we see the same thing for people who floss their teeth. So, if you floss your teeth, teeth flossers, well, this is hard to say, are living on average 4 years longer. Now, I don't think that tooth flossing is actually making you live longer, but it's reflective of a mindset that means you're taking care of yourself, you're more attentive to, if you're paying attention to your teeth, you mostly pay attention to your diet. And the same caveat can be made for coffee. What is it about coffee that could make you live longer? There are a series of compounds in coffee called polyphenols, which we know are beneficial for health. And so coffee is laden with this. So there's a whole series of other compounds that are being explored and tested for their potential anti-aging effect. I would say based on all the evidence, if you're drinking coffee, there's no reason to stop, but there's certainly reason to reconsider adding any sugar to it or even cream. And the last point that I want to make is there's a window for drinking coffee that is really critical. It is recommended not to drink coffee. It's the first thing in the morning when you wake up, and to wait an hour to allow adenosine, which is the compound that coffee blocks, to wait. So when you're sleeping because you accumulate a compound called adenosine, which induces sleeping. So when you get that drowsiness at night, this is your adenosine level rising. When you're putting coffee on it, you're blocking the adenosine, so you're blocking that drowsy effect. If you take coffee right when you're waking up, you are essentially interrupting your sleep in a violent way. And I think there's a whole school of thoughts that thinks that you should allow that your adenosine to wear off in the morning for an hour, and then have your first cup of coffee and enjoy it. Now, the second aspect is when you stop drinking coffee. Among us, there are fast and slow metabolizers of coffee. Those of you who metabolize it fast, no problem. You probably are the people who have a cappuccino or an espresso at dinner, and by 11 o'clock you're sleeping. If I do this at 4 o'clock in the morning, I'm turning in my bed and cussing at myself for having done this. So typically stop drinking coffee around 2 or 3 in the afternoon. That allows you to metabolize the coffee. Coffee is metabolized slowly. Most of us around 6 hours. So if you stop drinking coffee at 2 or 3, by 10 or 11, you will probably not have any traces of coffee. And that's, in many people, when I hear from people I don't sleep well, two things that I encourage them to look at. Alcohol is the greatest disruptor of sleep. If you don't believe me, if you drink alcohol, you will say, well, it makes me fall asleep. And it does. It has it induces sleep, but it also induces a form of sleep that will result in you waking up at 2 in the morning and having, because coffee really disrupts the pattern of your sleep. So the ideal sleep would be no coffee at night. And whenever I drink, even those 1 or 2 glasses on Saturday, I see it the next morning in my ring and in my watch and all of the wearables that I wear to track what my body is doing. So I can see it every single time. And coffee, again, stop at 3, and you will improve your ability to actually fall asleep.
So we got a question about inflammation, and I know from the research here at the Buck that a lot of the age-related diseases that we study have inflammation as their basis. And somebody wants to know, is there a way to reverse the effects of inflammation, even if it's being caused by trauma. But generally, what can we do to tamp down, to bring down inflammation?
It's a whole field of research, but one that is really central. So first, what is inflammation? There are two forms of inflammation. The first one is what we call acute inflammation. If you burn yourself on your hand, you will, over the next few hours, you will see all of the stages of inflammation. You will see a bubble, you will see the area becoming red, it will become painful. So pain, swelling, redness are all markers of acute inflammation. Eventually, this inflammation is going to yield to repair, okay? So this is eventually, there will be a crust, the inflammation will lower, the crust will fall off, and at the end, your skin will look exactly the same way it was before. And if you think about it, it's actually an incredible miracle, the ability that we have to repair in such a way. Now, what you see at the level, so this is acute inflammation resolving over 2 or 3 weeks period, so that there's nothing left except maybe a scar, if it's a cut. From a burn, you will not even see a scar. It will be completely clean. Acute inflammation occurring from an acute injury. Now, as we age, what is aging? Aging is an imbalance between the damage that we incur from living, from gamma rays coming from the space, from gravity, pulling on our muscles, on our joints, from breathing oxygen, which is pro-inflammatory, by the way, so the oxygen that we breathe causes inflammation. All of these forces create damage in your body, okay? And so our body, and so if you don't have, and create damage in DNA, in your proteins, and everything, if you don't have the ability to repair, even a single repair system missing, for example, there are human mutants who are lacking the ability to repair DNA, they live to 20 years old, and they show accelerated aging during this period. So it just highlights the idea of we are living through life in a balance between damage and repair. And our repair systems are incredibly powerful. Now, over time, the repair systems are becoming disabled. One reason is because they don't have the energy to actually do all the repairing. We talked about in AD early. So what you see, the aging process, which by the way is incredibly slow. It takes years for you to see a new wrinkle appear or something, or for you, over the lifespan, 40 to 50 years, the reason we change from the way we are at 20 until we are in our 80s is an accumulation of unrepaired damage. Okay, so the whole goal here is to try to activate these repair pathways, and much of the drugs and the interventions that we are focusing on are actually targeting these repair pathways and maintaining a balance. Now, as I was talking, I lost track of what the question was.
So based on what we know now,
oh, yes.
What can we do to
Well, let me just say a few words more about chronic inflammation. So this damage that accumulates during aging is sensed by the body by the same mechanism that tries to repair. So this chronic inflammation is a reflection of your attempt of your body to repair itself. At some point, it becomes overwhelmed. Now, the molecule that I told you about, CD38, is activated by chronic inflammation. So, and this was one of the first link between why is chronic inflammation bad? Because there's a realization inflammation by itself is not bad. It's bad when it is unresolved. And it is unresolved because the damage becomes overwhelming with time, and because the inflammation process itself, which was supposed to repair us, becomes part of the problem. It causes an AD decrease. As you have less NAD, your energy generation becomes less efficient, and then everything else slowly degrades. So now the question is, what can you do about it? All of the factors that we've talked about early, the lifestyle factors, and I can say a few words about them as well, all of them have an anti-inflammatory effect. Now, nutrition, good nutrition, there are many compounds in vegetables and fruits that we know are antioxidant Okay, so you probably have heard there's a whole industry of these antioxidants. I'm talking about the pills, the supplements, which by the way don't work. So don't buy antioxidant pills, they don't work. Eat fresh vegetables and fruits. Those have powerful molecules that have antioxidant activities, and they will decrease your chronic inflammation. Exercise, very profound. Now, paradoxically, acute exercise has acute inflammatory effect. So many of the professional athletes they're chronically inflamed because they're constantly pushing and trying to repair. And most of us, if you exercise, you actually induce a little bit of inflammation and then you resolve it. And sauna, who has a hot tub or who likes heat? This is one of my, okay, not enough people in this room, by the way. Again, another intervention that has really powerful effect. And the more I've been self-experimenting and reading about the literature, there's a whole literature coming up on the role of heat. Hot tubbing, sauna, hot Pilates, whatever form of heat, hammam heat you can subject yourself to. There's evidence coming out of Finland, for example, showing that where everybody does a sauna at least once a week, those who do it 2 or 3 or 4 times a week show a progressive increase in all of the chronic disease of aging. So not only enjoyable, but also incredibly powerful benefit in terms of your health. So think about your inflammation as the end product of many of the damages that are accumulating during aging, and think about all the lifestyle interventions that I mentioned. One night of sleep deprivation, we can measure increased inflammation in people. So it's the same thing. The last point I want to make about the lifestyle intervention, because I think many of us have a sort of a all or nothing type of approach, and they will describe, I'm either healthy or I'm not. There's periods of the year when I'm doing everything right, and then all hell breaks loose. I'll stop exercising, I'll eat anything. And I mean, this is human nature. Where I go through these cycles where you're discouraged, or you have an illness, and you have a hard time bouncing back, and all of a sudden all of your good healthy habits fall through. I think about all of these lifestyle factors as investment accounts. And I would like you to think about your health the way you think about your finances. And you've learned that you should diversify. And so the diversification here, in terms of your investment, the diversification is do a little bit of nutrition, do a little bit of exercise, do a little bit of sleep, do a little bit of everything. So diversify, start early, as I mentioned. This is another rule of investing. And last, choose a wise advisor. And this, you know how important it is to have someone who helps you to advise in terms of where you put your money. Having a good primary physician is hard to find, number one, but it's key in helping guide you through your health. And last but not least, pay attention to it, because if you don't pay attention to it, it is paying attention to you. So, and the end product of this is living in your 70s, 80s, 90s in good health. And it is not an illusion. It does exist, and I see it all the time. One of the greatest joys that I have in this job is to give seminars like this around the world, and then to come back the year after, and out of the nuggets that I'm sort of giving you, someone will come and say, listen, I listened to what you told me, and this has changed my life. I've lost 20 pounds, and I'm sleeping better, and I've done this. So we are at the beginning of a health movement. Believe it or not, and you've probably seen it in terms of public interest, in terms of influencers. Health is becoming cool, and you're living, in an area where we have everything to be healthy. And I think just learn, educate yourself, surround yourself by friends who actually know about health. There are a few people that we interact with a lot here at the Buck who are, sometimes overdoing it. But the key is that if you don't pay attention to it, you will unfortunately live the consequence. And I see so many people who are reaching, at risk of embarrassing Lee, who is 84 years old and still works full time, does 150 push-ups every morning. So He will tell you, he will share, this is something that he's made public in a Popular Mechanics article, so I'm not divulging any secret, but this is healthy living, getting to an age where you can be, many people have given up on life, where Lee is more ambitious than he could possibly be. To me, this is an inspiration of what many of us could aspire to.
Great. Thank you so much. So here's what's going to happen next. You're going to get an email either later today or tomorrow with a link to today's seminar, along with links to some background information that you might find helpful. If you registered today under somebody else's name and you want to receive that follow-up email, we need your email address, obviously. So if you want to do that, give it to the folks at the registration desk on the way out. I've also been passed a note to say that if you are parked in the traffic circle outside, please move your car immediately. and please don't do it again. Honestly, if the fire marshal saw that, the fire marshal would not be happy and your car might get moved someplace. So please, don't do that. Okay, so I'm going to be back here on February 5th for our next seminar, which is going to focus on ovarian aging and women's health. I'll be talking to Dr. Jennifer Garrison, who is at the center of efforts to really bring attention to a subject that has gotten shrift over these many years. We are thrilled with the community's interest in our clinical trials. Eric mentioned, we talked about the TIME trial. We have other trials happening. There are folks from the clinical research unit out in the atrium who will be happy to answer your questions and help you learn how you might get involved. I would be remiss if I did not do a fundraising pitch. It matters here at the Buck. And the true gift of giving to the Buck is that you make a difference. Our clinical trials were jump-started by a philanthropic gift. So it's personal. You can make a difference, and it's just a great way to invest in your own health and invest here at the Buck. Also, as we talked today, intellectual stimulation is good. So you can use in addition to coming to these seminars, I really encourage you to check out our excellent online course on the biology of aging. It's gotten great reviews. We also have a podcast that's called We're Not Getting Any Younger Yet. And we interview leaders from the field all across the world. It's a good listen. You'll come away smarter and with some good advice. If you're new to the Buck, come on a tour. We have tours every Tuesday and Thursday morning. You can sign up for them on our website. You can enjoy our beautiful IMPay designed building and learn more about our science. And then finally, keep up with the Buck. Follow us on social media. On our website, you can sign up for our newsletter, and we also have blog posts. So plenty of ways to get involved. Once again, thank you so much for coming. I'll be here on February 5th. I hope you will be too.